EnchantedMob and ZAMination. Those are names the Minecraft animation community is well accustomed to. Over the course of 6 years, these two studios have become some of the biggest and most influential of their genre, and while once they were both projects of passion, the curse of time and fame, as well as a series of controversies beginning in 2020, took their toll and eventually turned both of them into soulless husks of their former selves. But how did all this happen? How did Zam and EMob fall from grace? That is what I'll be documenting in this video. I think a lot of you watching this video must be familiar with ZAMination and EnchantedMob, or as I like to call them for short, Zam and EMob. Both are popular Minecraft animation channels specializing in Minecraft music videos, and by music videos, I mean music videos about Five Nights at Freddy's. Yeah, really. Anyway, Zam is run by twin brothers Zachary and Micah Preciado, whereas EMob is a bit different. The face of EMob is Seth Belanger, the creator and main animator during the early years of the channel. However, the actual manager of EMob happens to be his brother, Zach Belanger. Not to be confused with the other Zach from ZAMination, of course. I think I'll just refer to them as Zach B and Zach P from now on. Now, since Zam and EMob are both huge animation studios, it goes without saying that they have animation teams consisting of many more than just the people in charge. Throughout 2019 and 2020, the Zam brothers, aka the Preciados, also frequently animated for EMob in addition to running their own channel. Thing is, it seems that as of recently, Zach B, the guy who runs EMob, made a creative decision with approval of everyone involved to incorporate Zam into EMob as a subsidiary studio. In other words, Zam lost its independence. Both channels still exist, obviously, but for all intents and purposes, they've pretty much become one and the same, which might have been the final nail in the coffin of the passion and integrity these studios once had. I firmly believe that Zam and EMob have been going downhill since at least 2020, and probably a fair bit earlier. At this point, they've hit the Mariana Trench. Not in terms of user popularity, because as you can see, they're obviously still succeeding on that front. No, it's the heart of these two studios that's gone overboard more than anything else. But to understand why, we have to go back all the way to the beginning, just over 6 years ago. The year is 2015. The first age of YouTube's domination by Minecraft has been going on for quite a few years now, and it's ever so slowly approaching its end. We've already seen animation channels like Element Animation and Slamacow pop up and make their mark in this time period. Some of these animators would serve as inspirations for Zam and EMob, both of which would spread up this year. The ZAMination channel was created on March 30, 2015, by the Preciado brothers. On the same day, their first animation, The Enemy, was uploaded. Nowadays, it's not that great, of course, but I think for their first video, it served its purpose, and at the time, it was at least decent. It's also important to note that the creation of the channel this year was not the beginning of Zach P and Micah's animation careers. According to Zam's 1 million subscriber Q&A, they were introduced to animation by their sister and originally specialized in making short animations and posting them to platforms like Instagram. However, once they shifted towards making longer animations, they had to switch to YouTube and establish a channel due to the length limits on Instagram videos. This is why most of Zam's older videos are short and spontaneous, as it would take a while for them to transition towards creating longer, more professional animations. This means they would be irrelevant for a little while, but stay tuned because I'll get back to them in due time. Now, you're probably wondering where EMob was at this time. Seth Belanger created the EnchantedMob channel on February 26, 2014. You'll notice this is significantly earlier than when Zam was created, but it doesn't really matter since EMob was completely under the radar until 2015. Similar to Zam, the earlier videos on EMob were just Seth's random animations, until he uploaded his first music video, Survive the Night, which is animated to the FNAF song of the same name. It's pretty obvious that Survive the Night is what first blew up the EMob channel, as it has a whopping 61 million views compared to the earlier videos, almost all of which have views in the hundreds of thousands. You may think that's still a lot, and it is, but it can be assumed that most of the views on these earlier videos were people watching years later after the channel became well known. Seth knew he had hit the popularity diamonds with Survive the Night, and began working toward creating more music videos. He struck again with Just Gold, and then again with Die in a Fire. Both of these animations, while not nearly rivaling Survive the Night, still amassed millions upon millions of views. As time went on, Seth continued working on more and more music videos, knowing they were the heart of his channel. This was an era where, at least to my knowledge, Seth himself was in charge, and Zach B hadn't yet taken control of things. These early animations were certainly flawed, and they obviously don't look good compared to what the channel produces nowadays, but even so, they had a far greater advantage: passion. Meanwhile, the Zam brothers were taking much more sweet time to figure out what they wanted to do. As of 2016, they were still mostly doing short animations, collab entries, YouTuber funny moments, just anything that could suffice for them at the time. It wouldn't be until 2018 when they would create their first music video. Well, that's not quite true. They did animate a music video called Yandere in the title for Minecraft YouTuber Sia in early 2016, but not only was it on his channel and not the Zam channel, it didn't really make enough views to warrant any more for a while. Also, Sia originally made the song as a criticism of the lack of integrity and clickbait in the Minecraft community, so I find it pretty ironic that Zam animated it for him, since at this point they've basically become the same thing he was criticizing in the first place.
Now you have become the very thing you swore to destroy.
Anyway, what I'm saying here is that in the early years of Zam and EMob, both were growing and amassing popularity, mostly separate of each other. As someone who's watched lots of older videos on both channels, I personally think they were both great at this point in time. There was clearly a lot of heart and passion put into these animations, and it felt like both Seth and the Zam brothers were focused primarily on having a good time and making their fans happy. But as you all surely know, this sort of mindset isn't always permanent, especially when you let fame and popularity get to your head. Before I get on to the next section, there's one more thing I need to mention. On June 2, 2016, another Minecraft animator arrived on the stage, Eckercoaster. Also known by his real name, Ethan, Eckercoaster would go on to be inspired by both Zam and EMob and create similar videos of his own. At first, his presence in the community wasn't very important, but soon enough, that would change. I want you to remember Ethan, because he's the center point of the most integral part of this analysis by far. Anyhow, moving on. We're now getting around to 2017 and 2018, an era of which I consider to be the golden age of EMob and Zam. Seth's animations were mostly solid in 2016, but I think they started to get really good in 2017. His music videos would consistently rake in millions of views, serving as a consistent source of popularity for the channel. As mentioned previously, Zam would stick with standard animations up until 2018, when they would finally upload their first music video, the Foxy song. Afterward, they would go on to produce plenty more. I believe it was most likely late 2017 when Seth and the Zam brothers became well acquainted with each other. November of that year saw the founding of Animation Sins, a CinemaSins-inspired joint project between Zam and EMob. Originally, Animation Sins was founded by these professional animators with the intent of offering constructive criticism towards others. Seems like a good thing on the surface, but it didn't take long for the channel to devolve into the same unfair, sarcastic ragging nonsense that CinemaSins is notorious for these days. I honestly never really liked Animation Sins, and I've stood by the opinion for years that they've done considerably more harm than good to the people they've criticized. Keep all of this in mind because believe me, it's going to be important later. 2017 and 2018 also saw the gradual rise of Zach B., Seth's brother. While Seth was an animator at heart, Zach was much more of a businessman, and as such, he became the manager of EMob, while Seth continued to take care of the animation front. This in and of itself was perfectly fine, but Zach's influence would only continue to grow as time went on, and as many people would discover later, he was not exactly the type of person deserving of that much power. At the time, though, things were still pretty good. I actually had an insane Zam and EMob phase back in late 2019, so trust me when I say I've watched all their older quote-unquote golden age animations. Seth's music videos were still clearly filled to the brim with passion and effort, and the same held true for those produced by Zam. There were some I liked more than others, but I pretty much liked all of them to some degree. Nonetheless, there were problems with this content model, especially for EMob. Most of Seth's music videos were based around whatever game franchise was popular at the time. As such, his animations were primarily based around FNAF with a couple about Bendy and Undertale mixed in just to vary it up a little. There's obviously nothing wrong with that on the surface level, but it does contribute to a problem I like to call the consistent content trap. Basically, the consistent content trap is when you, as a YouTuber, spend an extended period of time repeatedly pumping out the same type of video to such a degree that you've essentially made that type of video your main identity, and your primary source of views. This means that if you were to try to make something new and unique, it would most likely underperform because your audience is only following you for that type of video you usually make, not for your channel as a whole. I've had to deal with that situation at least 3 or 4 times myself in the 4 years my current channel has existed, so trust me, I would know. Consider the following example. Saddest, who I'm sure you've heard about at least once, has made a huge name for herself because of her Dream SMP animatics, each of which have raked in millions of views. Of course, she has an incredible talent and deserves all the popularity and praise she gets, regardless of how I feel about Dream, which is like a whole other can of worms. But the issue is that if she were to diverge from those animatics and try something else, if she even so much as made an animatic not about the Dream SMP, I guarantee you it would be critically underviewed when compared to her animatics that are about the Dream SMP. If you still don't understand what the consistent content trap is supposed to imply, just look at Songs of War, which you have to be somewhat familiar with if you follow me as a creator. Songs of War performed horribly compared to most animations produced by BPS, and while there were many other factors at play discussed already by director David R.B., it wouldn't be so outrageous to assume that the underperformance of the series was in part due to its divergence from BPS's normal content. So, the reason I explained all this is because the consistent content trap, to some degree, applied to Seth Belanger as well. Sprinkled in the middle of his video game-centric music videos was a lone animation, not linked to FNAF, Bendy, Undertale, or anything besides plain old Minecraft. This music video was Fly Again. In my opinion, Fly Again is genuinely flipping fantastic, and by far my favorite music video by EMOB. But the issue is, because it wasn't linked to any game franchise EMOB's audience had become used to seeing, it noticeably underperformed compared to the other music videos. The one time Seth tried to do something truly special and unique, it didn't pay off, even though it really should have. As such, I believe he may have noticed this, and reasoned that his best course of action was to stick with the norm he'd established for the channel, and that is exactly what he did. Even with these constraints, however, the channel was still going strong and made plenty of music videos worth watching. To this day, I still think the Disconnected series was at least fairly good. The same held true for Zam, who at this point were still new to making music videos anyway. In 2019, however, things began to change. 2019 was when Seth really started to lose control of things. I can only assume Zach B was at the absolute height of his power by this point, since by now, EMOB was a full-fledged studio hiring other animators to work on music videos. Originally, these animators must have been under Seth's guidance, but that wouldn't last forever. It was also this year when EMOB and Zam became really intertwined, with both Zach P and Micah becoming animators for EMOB in addition to running Zam. Later in 2019, Zam also began hiring animators of their own, with Just Monica being the last video done entirely by Zach and Micah. Don't interpret any of this as me saying hiring animators is bad. If you run a massive studio, of course you should hire people to help you. I would do the exact same thing if I was in their position. But in this specific case, it was a step towards the eventual corporatization of the studio, and to make matters worse, there have been allegations presented by former EMOB animators that management was awful to them, even threatening to fire their employees if they so much as demanded better pay or better treatment. Granted, I don't know if this has been absolutely proven, but yikes. There's not really that much more to say about this segment of the video. Despite the gradual shift towards corporatization, Zam and EMOB were both still going strong, and if you were to disregard the existence of animation sins, they were most definitely a positive impact on the community at this point. However, 2019 was their last year in the clear. 2020 was when everything would really begin falling apart. It was the middle of 2020. The COVID pandemic and its consequences had by now ravaged the world, but Zam and EMOB were still pumping out videos just as per usual. However, not everyone was so fortunate. You'll remember Eckercoaster, otherwise known as Ethan, the independent animator I mentioned way earlier. His current situation was, to say the least, by no means ideal. Over the previous few years, Ethan had made plenty of animations of his own, taking heavy inspiration from Zam and EMOB as he saw them both as role models. It's important to understand that he did not copy anyone. Being inspired by another creator does not mean you're stealing their content. There's nothing wrong with using ideas from others to make something of your own. I firmly believe Ethan did nothing wrong, but at that time, many people did not share that opinion. Ethan was not seen in a positive light by the communities of Zam and EMOB, with many considering him a lesser copycat of both channels. He was also viewed as toxic by some, which is weird because as far as I know, there was nothing toxic he ever did. To add insult to injury, his animations were harshly criticized by animation sins to the point where their own writers would eventually speak out against it. It's undeniable that Ethan's animations weren't perfect and had flaws, but that didn't justify the borderline insults in the everything wrong with videos. Unfortunately, all the hate from the community had a horrendous impact on Ethan's mental health. I'm obviously not going to elaborate on this specific point because it's personal and I have no right to, but the basic information you need to know is that Ethan was internally struggling and losing faith in his animations because people were constantly crapping on him every time he made one, with no effort from Zam or EMOB taken to stop them. It got to the point where Ethan would take breaks for months on end, and it seemed like he was going to fizzle out completely, until July 17, 2020. On this date, the unexpected happened. Although some were aware of the harassment Ethan had been receiving, it was previously thought that this was only the fault of toxic members of the community. But that day, the truth was revealed. Ethan uploaded a video with an attached document explaining everything, and in doing so, he revealed that the situation had been far worse than anyone could have imagined. Ethan's video contained a compilation of some of the most vile comments he'd received from toxic community members. Not only were these people insulting him and his animations, they were making false accusations that he was the toxic one, and an attention seeker, despite the fact that neither of these claims had any merit. There was one Discord message talking about Ethan that said, and I quote, "The community is better off with him dead." Look, I couldn't make this up if I tried. This was beyond disgusting, and that wasn't even the end of it. The document attached to Ethan's video went into detail on the role Zam and EMOB themselves played in this situation. Not only did they turn a blind eye to the harassment Ethan was receiving, there were at least 3 people who were either actively contributing to the problem or refusing to even acknowledge it when specifically asked to by Ethan. These people were Zach P, one of the Zam brothers, Seth, the original creator of EMOB, and worst of all, Zach B, the current manager of EMOB. As for Micah, the other Zam brother, there is still to this day no indication that he had anything to do with this, so assuming he was in the dark, he seems to be the only innocent one of the four. And get this, when I say Zach B was the worst in this situation, I really mean that. The way he treated Ethan, as established in this document, was legitimately psychotic. In just one instance, he went as far as to manipulate, blackmail, and threaten Ethan, all because he rightfully pointed out that his outro had been stolen by EnchantedMob in one of their music videos. Any reasonable human being would simply stop using that outro or at least have the decency to credit Ethan for it. But as you can probably conclude by this point, Zach B was not and is not reasonable, nor is he a decent person by any means. Seth was nowhere near as bad as his brother in this situation, but that's saying basically nothing. When Ethan contacted him asking for action to be taken against the toxicity in the EnchantedMob community, Seth displayed a tremendous amount of apathy and completely dismissed the problem. To this day, I still find it hard to believe Seth was unaware of just how bad the situation was, so I don't think he had an excuse to completely ignore Ethan's plea for help. He displayed a similar level of apathy on the topic of the criticisms on Ethan's videos by Animation Sins, which we know were unfair and overly harsh because at least 2 of the writers who sympathize with Ethan admitted that fact to him. As for Zach P, aka Zach from Zam, Ethan never actually mentioned him in the document, nor did he show any particular instance of Zach P treating him badly. However, we still know he was involved somewhat because he admitted it himself after the situation came to light, even though he completely backpedaled on it later. Again, there is still nothing to suggest Micah was a direct contributor to the problem, and the same can be said for the rest of both studios' members, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few more bad apples in the bunch who never really got called out. To summarize what was established in Ethan's document, the harassment directed at him was not only disgusting, it was also a consistent string of behavior from the community over the past couple of years that was both ignored and contributed to by both Zam and EnchantedMob. This was all bad enough to outsiders looking in, but if you were to think from the perspective of Ethan himself, it would be like being verbally abused and having your problems dismissed by the people you look up to the most. The good news was that Ethan had overcome his mental struggles and was determined to come back to YouTube stronger than ever before, but this also meant the tables had turned. With the cat out of the bag, Zam and EnchantedMob were about to face a massive storm. It wasn't long before the comment section of Zam's latest video, their million subscriber Q&A, was flooded by people demanding the studio to take accountability for what had happened to Ethan. This happened to EnchantedMob as well, but Zam was targeted much more, likely because those who read Ethan's document confused the two Zachs and wrongly assumed Zach B's actions were those of Zach P. I was there when the situation was first blowing up, and initially, I defended Zach P, because I could distinguish the two, and at that point, there was nothing to suggest he was part of the problem. However, once the Zam brothers noticed what was happening, Zach P was quick to address the situation in a pinned comment on the Q&A, admitting he had a part to play in the mistreatment of Ethan. At the time, I thought this apology should have gone in an actual video, or channel announcement, so more people would have seen it, but it still seemed adequate enough, and I respected Zach P for owning up to his actions and promising never to repeat them. Until he deleted his apology. I was notified of this recently by a friend of mine on Twitter, and I went to check to see if it was true, and yeah, sure enough, the comment's gone. The apology is completely gone, and I know I can't really say for sure, but I can assume that the reason why he deleted his apology was because he never actually cared in the first place, and was only apologizing because he was called out. But I guess in his defense, at least he apologized in the first place, unlike Seth or the other Zach. It's been well over a year since this happened, and I've still not heard a single indication that either of the Belongers have done anything to make up for their actions. If I'm wrong, or if I missed something, tell me, but I genuinely doubt it. And in Zach B's case, even if he did apologize, I'm sorry wouldn't really cut it after the way he treated Ethan. I've heard people say this doesn't matter because all of it happened in the past, because, apparently 2019 is a long time ago according to someone's logic. And just for the record, someone who did something crappy a while ago should not be absolved of what they did just because they did it a while ago. They should be absolved if they've genuinely grown as a person and made up for it, which, at the very least, Zach B certainly hasn't. I guarantee you all that the internet would be a much better place if we all accepted a simple truth. Time does not heal wounds. Accountability heals wounds. So anyhow, you might be wondering what happened in the aftermath of this drama. Things ended well for Ethan, as a weight had been lifted off his chest, and he was now back to making content he enjoyed. So far, it seems he's been doing great since, and that makes me happy too. As for Zam and EnchantedMob, they mostly just brushed off the whole situation and kept pumping out music videos as per usual. This is just a minor detail, but around this point in time, Zam switched their animation software from Blender to Maya, the one EnchantedMob always used, presumably so they could become more uniform along the way to the merger of the two studios. Meanwhile, Animation Sins was completely abandoned. Not a single video was made after Ethan had come forth with his document, and their most recent video was uploaded 3 days prior, so it can be reasonably assumed that EnchantedMob and Zam stopped producing content on Animation Sins for fear of sparking more controversy now that Ethan had exposed them for being unfair to his animations. So far as I know, this abandonment was never officially addressed by anyone involved with animation sins. It was simply left as a relic of history, and if you ask me, thank God, it was about time. But if you think this was the end of things, oh boy, you could not be more wrong. Somehow, Zam and EMob ended up screwing over their reputation even more. Don't Come Crying was a collab between Zam and EMob uploaded in very late 2020 that stands to this day as the last FNAF music video from either studio, although it would still be followed up by non-FNAF related music videos like Alex and the Dragon and Angry Alex. But the important thing to note about Don't Come Crying is that it was the source of yet another EMob controversy. Quite frankly, this was what finally killed my last bit of faith in EMob because, well, Don't Come Crying is really bad. I don't mean to suggest its animation is bad, because obviously it's not. Just like every other Zam and EMob production, it's fluid, engaging, and stylistic. Visually, Don't Come Crying is great, but the issues I have with it are a whole different can of worms entirely. You see, Don't Come Crying, originally written and sung by Tryhard Ninja, is a song about Circus Baby. There's nothing wrong with that, and clearly none of the blame can be put on Tryhard for how Zam and EMob decided to adapt his song, but the thing is, she's portrayed as excessively sassy in the animation, emphasis on the air quotes there. For this music video, they also decided to update her model to include noticeable breasts. This would make sense if the same treatment was given to other female robots in the animation like Ballora, but it's not. This inconsistency leads me to believe that the Circus Baby model was given breasts purely for the sake of sexualization, especially because of how she's animated and portrayed in general. I mean, there's literally a butt shot and a scene of her bathing, despite the fact that her mental age is probably around like 10 at most, as can be assumed by how Elizabeth Afton is portrayed in FNAF. Circus Baby is Elizabeth, as Elizabeth's soul occupies the robot, so the fact that Circus Baby is a child character should not be up for debate. Therefore, I find the way she was portrayed in Don't Come Crying questionable at best and completely disgusting at worst. As a matter of fact, many people watching the animation felt the same when it came out, and EMob was criticized harshly due to being the ones in charge of the project. Of course, dignified hero and moral champion Zach B came to the defense of his studio, trying to prove that no one had done anything wrong. And as such, he delivered the most flawless and irrefutable argument ever made. I'm joking, of course. What? You what? How many drugs do you think Zach B was on when he wrote this?
She was 14 in Sister Location, and it's been 4 years since that game released, so now she's 18.
You need a minimum of like 4 brain cells to understand why this statement is idiotic. What possessed this man to think that the release date of the game has any bearing on Elizabeth's age? I feel like MatPat needs to come over to Zach B's house and give him a lecture, because Sister Location does not take place in 2016. In no way does the timeline in the lore correlate with the timeline of game releases. Fictional characters don't age with the passage of real-life time, genius. She's still 14. Hell, she's probably even younger than that, since she doesn't even have a confirmed age, and Zach B is just pulling this out of his sleeve. His defenses are pretty much on the same level as, well, my version of the character is a different age, and hold just as little merit. So yeah, this excuse was absolute trash and people didn't buy it. It only added fuel to the fire, and basically proved that EMob had intentionally sexualized Circus Baby on the assumption that it was perfectly justified, which it was not. Once Zach B realized he'd effectively shot himself in the foot, he tried to double back on his previous statements with a fake apology, and reshape the narrative to make it look like the studio had just made an honest mistake. I'm really not sure why he didn't just say that in the first place, but he clearly isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, so go figure. At the end of the day, EMob had, at least to an extent, sexualized an underage character in their Minecraft animated music video, which they must have known would have a viewer base consisting mostly of children. I really shouldn't have to explain why this is a problem. Zam is less at fault, but they were complicit and can still be blamed because they were involved in the project as well. Thankfully, a lot of people seem to share my opinion on the matter and condemned EMob, but ultimately, beyond Zach B's soulless Twitter apology, the studio did nothing to right their wrongs, just like the last time it had gotten into a controversy, and that was it. The year is 2021, 7 years since the creation of EMob, and 6 since the creation of Zam. Both channels had a good run, but after all the controversies of the previous year, Zach B's rise to power, and the gradual corporatization of the studios, this is when we finally see what were once animation channels filled with passion and heart degrade into the husks they are today. Ever since the release of Don't Come Crying, Zam began to fill their second channel to the brim with, in my opinion, some of the laziest content possible. Said channel had once been home to behind-the-scenes videos and stuff like that, which I actually found interesting, but now it's just a billion copies of the same music video with slight variations cloned for the sake of reaching as much attention from the algorithm as possible. I mean, just take a look. At this point, it wouldn't even be hyperbole to say they might upload a video like, insert animation here but we change the color of 1 pixel in 1 frame. EMob's second channel has more of that nonsense too, albeit a lot less. But hey, at least these are just their second channels. I'm sure they have their priorities straight on their main. Well crap. Basically, all the context you need to know is that around the time EMob incorporated ZAM, both studios began to stray away from music videos this year and began making Minecraft FNAF animated series like Fazbear and Friends and Circus Baby's World. I've watched the first 2 episodes of Fazbear and Friends and, well, it is serviceable entertainment for kids, but it's not all that special. It's impossible for me to know this for sure, but it just feels like Zeph and the ZAM brothers don't really care about putting passion into their work anymore. They'll just pump out whatever keeps them relevant or gets them views, and that's basically it. It explains why the studios haven't bothered to do anything to make up for their mistakes, because they have legitimately zero integrity left to spare. According to Omega63, a friend of mine, Zeph only ever does lighting these days as far as his contributions to EMob productions go, so yeah, it's safe to say he's had a fall from grace. I feel like I need to clarify something. In no way am I saying ZAM and EMob's animations look bad. The animators working there are unbelievably talented and obviously dedicated to their jobs. But here's the thing, unlike with, say, Black Plasma Studios, the animators don't decide what to animate. They're handed instructions by the higher-ups and expected to follow through with them. Sure, they do it well, but as harsh as it may sound, I just don't care. The fact that ZAM and EMob's animations are visually impressive is cool and all, but that's not why I used to watch them. The objective quality has no bearing on my enjoyment. I watch Minecraft animations because, well, they're fun. Just compare the current state of ZAM and EMob to the current state of BPS. You can criticize BPS for using insufficient facial rigs, or for not bending over backward to prevent so much as a single instance of clipping or foot sliding, but in my opinion, none of that matters. When I watch BPS animations, I feel things. I feel the passion and heart the animator put in. I feel how much they cared about what they were making. And it's not just BPS. I feel that with Element animation, with Ecker Coaster, with Saddest, and with so many others. I used to feel the same way when watching animations by ZAM and EMob, but not anymore. I feel nothing watching their latest content. If you enjoy current EMob and ZAM, that's fine. Don't let me dictate what you can and can't like. But I really hope no one tries to sit me down and explain to me that stuff like this is the epitome of creativity, because at that point, you might as well go around praising 5-minute crafts. I'm not trying to crap on anyone who works at these studios, except Zach B. He can stub his toe every day of the week for all I care, but this is just how it is. ZAM and EMob used to be something special, but that era has come to pass, and now it's as if they're just shells of their former selves. And I feel like it's going to stay that way for years to come, if they even survive that long to begin with. And there you have it, everyone. The downfall of EnchantedMob and ZAMination. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, or at least found it interesting or useful in some way, but if not, well, that's on me. At the end of the day, all I can say is this. You either die a passion project, or you live long enough to become a soulless business.